Hello again, everybody. In this lesson, we're going to be learning about small katakana. You may remember in our hiragana lessons, we learned about small ya, yu, and yo, and small tsu. We are going to learn about those again in our katakana lesson, but we're also going to learn some other small katakana. All right, so let's begin. So let's start with small ya, yu, and yo. Alright, and since we've already done this with hiragana, I'm going to give you an abbreviated version of this. We just take an I katakana and we combine it with a small ya, yu, or yo. So I'm going to show you all of the different combinations of this that we have over the next few slides. So we've got kya, kyu, and kyo, and gya, gyu, and gyo. Sha, shu, and sho, and ja, ju, and jo. Cha, chu, and cho. Nya, nyu, and nyo. Hya, hyu, and hyo. Bya, byu, and byo, and pya, pyu, and pyo. Mya, myu, and myo. Rya, ryu, and ryo. So now that we've gone over small ya, yu, and yo, we're going to take a look at our small tsu. So you may remember from our hiragana lesson that anytime we have a word written in Romaji that has a double consonant, with the exception of n, we can use a small tsu to represent that. And what that double consonant or what that small tsu actually represents is a short pause called a glottal stop. So for example, if we look at the word hato, we would write that ha, small tsu, and to. And again, that small tsu represents a short pause. Basically, we have one beat for ha, a one beat pause for that small tsu, and then a one beat for to. So ha, to. So those are the small katakana that kind of match up with what we've already learned about small hiragana. But I mentioned at the beginning of this lesson that we're going to have some other examples of small katakana that we don't really deal with when we're using hiragana. The big reason for that, of course, is because katakana, one of their primary uses, is to write foreign words. And you'll notice that in terms of sounds that are available in Japanese, Japanese is actually pretty limited compared to other languages in what sounds you can actually express. So sometimes, in order to kind of try to duplicate those sounds more accurately from other languages, you kind of can use katakana combinations or small katakana that were not originally in Japanese. And I'm going to show you some examples of those. So, first, if we take shi and combine it with a small a, we can get the sound she. So one more time, that is she. So, for example, if we combine shi, a small a, and hu, we get shefu, which means chef. Similarly, if we take ji and a small a, we get je. So, if I put together ji, a small e, su, ta, and a long dash, the word we get is jesuta, which means jester. A te combined with a small e can be used to make the sound t. Now, you also will frequently see examples where to imitate the sound t in a word, we will just use a chi katakana for that. So this is not something that you're going to see used super frequently, but you will see it used sometimes. And a big example of that is one of the earliest words we learned. You take pa, long dash, te, small e, and another long dash, and you get party, which means party. And similarly, if you combine de and a small e, you get d. Once again, this is a sound where oftentimes you'll actually see a use of the katakana G to recreate the D sound from English, but you can also use this form, the de combined with a small e. Just want to let you know, this is another one that you're not likely to see a whole lot in Japanese, but it does exist and is used in the language. And an example of a word where that is used, if we combine de, small e, ku, shi, small yo, na, ri, and a long dash, we get dikushonari, which means dictionary. If we combine chi and a small e, we get che. And this one is great because you can use it to write my name, Chezuri. But we are actually going to look at another word that uses this sound. One more time, that is che. If we combine chi, a small e, and su, we get chesu, which means chess. So now that we've learned those, we're actually going to look at a family of sounds that you can form with a small katakana. So if we take our katakana hu and combine it with a small vowel katakana, we can get a number of different sounds. You may have noticed that in Japanese, hu is the only F sound that exists naturally in that language, whereas in other languages, there are lots of other different sounds that begin with F. So this is where this comes in, and I'm going to show you what I mean. So if we combine hu with a small a, we get fa. If we combine it with a small e, we get fi. Combine it with a small e, and we get fe. And if we combine it with a small o, we get fo. So if we take hu, small a, n, ta, shi, and a long dash, we get fantashi, which means fantasy. You may have also noticed that in Japanese, we don't really have a lot of W sounds. We basically have wa and wo, and wo is kind of tricky because oftentimes it's pronounced as o. Well, one of the ways around that when you're using katakana, sometimes to represent a W sound, you can use u and a small vowel katakana. So, u and a small e is we. If we combine it with a small e, we get we. And if we combine it with a small o, we get wo. And I know we already have a katakana for wo. As I said, it's a little bit tricky. So, for example, if we take u, a small e, su, ki, and a long dash, we get wisuki, which means whiskey. Now, what about the V sound in Japanese? Well, usually when we want to represent a V sound in Japanese, we just use a B katakana. So, for example, the word for video in Japanese is bideo. The word for vuvuzela is bubuzera. But there is the option of taking an U katakana, adding on a dakuten, aka nigori, and usually adding a small katakana next to it to represent the V sound. So, for example, we have our U with the nigori at the top and a small A. This would be pronounced va. With a small E, it's pronounced V. If we have an U with nigori and no small katakana by it, that will be read as vu. With the small e, it's pronounced ve. And with the small o, it's pronounced vo. So, if we take our u with nigori at the top, a small a, n, pa, I, and a, we get vampire, which means vampire. Now, keep in mind, this is not necessarily used too frequently. That actually, you may find, is the case with a lot of these. And even the word vampire in Japanese has a number of different acceptable spellings using katakana. You actually can use ba instead of va to write vampire in Japanese. I am by no means an expert on this. However, I think generally a good rule of thumb is the more established a word is in the language, basically, the farther back its use in the language goes, the more likely it's going to have a more standard spelling. For example, using a B katakana to represent a V sound is probably going to be more likely the further back you go. The more modern a word is, the more frequently it's used in the modern era, I think the more likely you are to maybe see some of these, I don't want to say less orthodox, but maybe newer ways of spelling these words, using the u with the dakuten or nigori at the top to represent a V sound, for example. So just something to keep in mind. If we take a to and add a small u to it, we can get the sound tu. Now, this is another one that I do not think is that common in the language. I don't believe I ever actually saw this sound used this way when I was learning katakana. I think all the places I looked at where you had a foreign word with a tu sound in it, you would just use the katakana tsu to represent that. However, when I was looking, researching into katakana, this combination came up in multiple places. So it's something that it is good just to know that it's out there, just in case you run into it. I don't expect you'll run into it that much. So if we were to take to, small u, ru, and a long dash, we would get turu, which means true. And our last katakana sound is do plus a small u, which we can read as do. And again, I don't think I ever saw this one when I was learning katakana, but just like our previous one, it came up in numerous places when I was looking into this. So again, you're not likely to see it that much, but it's good just to know that it's out there. And one example of a word that uses this sound, if we take do, small u, long dash, and mu, we get doom, which means doom. So please feel free to go over the things that we learned as much as you need to. I know this was a pretty dense lesson compared to some of the previous ones, but once you've got all that down, we can move on and practice spelling some words. So our first word is cheddar, which means cheddar. Chi, small e, da, long dash, cheddar. Our next word is kyanpu, which means camp. Kyanpu. Ki, small ya, n, and pu. Kyanpu. Our next word, New York, which means New York. New York. Ni, small u, long dash, yo, long dash, and ku. New York. Fiction, which means fiction. Fiction. Hu, small e, ku, shi, small yo, and n. Fiction. And our last word, credito card, which means credit card. Credito card. Ku, re, ji, small tsu, to, ka, long dash, and do. Credito card. And that is all for our katakana lessons. Ja, mata.